Hello and welcome back to the NOTCAST. It is Saturday, 26th of August, 2023. It's episode 313. Good God, will he ever stop? And today I'm talking about Manic Street Preachers and their second compilation LP, National Treasures, released in 2011, and their 10th studio album, released in 2013, Rewind the Film. This is going to be, I'm going to be pretty harsh on this album, but my reasons are good, and I will talk you through those as we go along. Also, I'd like to say that today I shouldn't be filming this. Actually, I should be in a pub in London with some friends. I still have some friends, but there is a train strike. I support the workers on the train strike front, so we have gone for a plan B. We're all at home, and I'm doing this. God knows what the rest of them are doing. Probably watching Alien on the Blu-ray telly box. Who knows? So today, here we go. The second Manic Street Preachers Greatest Hits compilation, best of albums, released in late 2011, hot on the heels of Postcards from a Young Man, their famed One Last Shot at Mass Communication. National Treasures is effectively their second last shot at mass communication, a greatest hits album at a 10-year interval after 2002's Forever Delayed. This is on CD, a chronological compendium of every single A-side that they have, apart from Suicide Alley, which was self-released, the New Art Riot EP, which was an EP and not a single, and the Feminine is Beautiful 7-inch, and the UK channel Boredom Flexi-Disc. So the first four releases aren't on here because they're not, strictly speaking, either singles or their EPs or whatever, or Flexi-Discs in the case of UK channel Boredom. So this is the first Manics single, starting with Motown Junk and running all the way through to number 38, This Is the Day, which means that it doesn't have the Japanese release of Further Away or Nobody Loved You, all the singles that were released only in other foreign territories. So these are all the UK singles from 1 through to 38, which for a 20-year period, releasing 40 singles or 38 singles is pretty good going. But what it does do is, because it's arranged chronologically, it kind of charts the rise and fall of Manic Street Preachers as a band. Now, I'm not a huge fan of greatest hits albums. I never have been. I never will be. I think if there is a way that you're going to present them, it has to be the singles in a chronological order, so you can track the band's evolution and maturity, or not, as the case might be, as they change from one version of the band to another. Greatest hits albums where the songs are presented somewhat out of sequence frustrate me, because you're listening to different lineups, different versions of the band. You're missing parts of the story as it goes along. And I much prefer singles compilations as opposed to greatest hits albums. So National Treasures was preceded by a single, and this was an unusual choice because it wasn't released commercially as a physical product apart from pre-orders from HMV. So you got the This Is the Day, a cover version of Matt Johnson's band from 1983. At the time, what felt like a melancholic overview of one's very recent history, but obviously looked at from the remove of 20 or 30 years later. This was released 30 years after This Is the Day, or 28 years after This Is the Day was originally released. By the Manics version is, amongst many other things, an inessential cover version. They don't do anything new or particularly interesting with it. They turn the omnichord kind of thing into a guitar line. That's about it, and the drums are real and not through a Bontempi organ. But that's the only thing they do, is that they rock the song up, and rocking the song up ain't exactly that interesting. It kind of also kind of flattens and bluntens the melancholy that sits inside the song. Now, This Is the Day, I love that song. They're one of my favourite bands, as you can tell, because I'm doing them on the NOTCAST at the moment. In fact, I'm just prepping up my episode for the Sidiola era of the. But This Is the Day, as a Manic song, feels. I understand completely why they've done it, because it's a song about reading some old letters and thinking about how much you've changed, looking back over the past, all the money in the world couldn't buy back those days, all those type of things. But at the same point, it's the Manic self-mythologizing. Now, lots of bands are very good at mythologizing. The KLF are fantastically good at that. Manics are pretty good at that as well, as we will see in an upcoming B-side. But with this, I think what they're trying to do is they're reaching for a meaning which they don't necessarily fully grasp with this particular track. When I think of great Manic singles, I never think of the cover versions. I never think of Suicide is Painless. I never think of This Is the Day, because in my eyes, they aren't great singles. What they are is they're perfectly cromulent cover versions, but they're as cynical or perhaps as inessential to the band's understanding as any other band's cover versions. I'm not a huge fan of cover versions, full stop. I don't mind them when bands do interesting and new things with them. For example, when Pet Shop Boys add new chords or write new parts to go into Go West or Is On My Mind, for example. That's pretty exciting. That's pretty innovative. When the Manics do a pretty much note for note cover, apart from the fact that they're replacing the little crappy Bontempi organ and keyboards with guitars and actual drums, it's not original. There's no innovation in the performance of that song. The single, and by the way, I'm pointing out this is a CD single. This is the only physical version of This Is the Day that was released in a standalone fashion. Was only available when you did a HMV pre-order of National Treasures. Then this is the 2 CD and DVD edition of it that comes with the This Is the Day single. So, of course, on the 28th of October 2011, I ordered it. But I don't necessarily think that it was particularly a great choice to have. It was kind of the song where you listen and you go, okay, it feels like it's a career closer as a cover version, as opposed to another step in the journey. And maybe it's at this point the Manics were kind of symbolising with National Treasures. So effectively they were saying that their career as a charting singles act was very definitely coming to a close. Most bands have a period where they've got most 20 years where they're really at the peak of their abilities, and after that they kind of become nostalgia acts. In fact, most bands, the first 10 years are really where it's all at. You think about Pink Floyd, even probably from 1973 to 1981 is the period that lots of people think about Pink Floyd. New Order, most people think about 1981 to 1993 with Regret. Depeche Mode, most people think about 1981 to 1993. I dare say Arctic Monkeys, most people kind of think about them from around about 2005 to 2013. It's quite chastening, actually, to think about a thing where people automatically write you off as a band after the first 10 years of your existence, and no matter what you do after that, you're a nostalgia act. But I think firstly and foremost, when you're younger, the songs come quicker. It's easier, it's faster to write songs and material because you haven't gone through all the different permutations of the chords and the sequences and the ideas and the things that you want to say. And the other thing that you have when you're starting off is that you're young and you're full of ideas, and ideas are bursting out of you like a ray of light pouring out of every orifice. Whereas over time, you then get to the point where you start to go, well, okay, so I've got songs to write. What am I going to write about today? And then you end up doing concept albums about sad whales or painters or something. And I mean, certainly for me, as a listener, my time as a listener is important. It's valid and it's rare. And especially if you've just become a parent or if you're working, you find huge chunks of your time every week are stolen from you. And sometimes you make sacrifices and you sell that money, but your attention is limited. So if you're a band, you kind of go, right, people are making a decision here to spend their leisure time, their money, and their investment and their attention in you. Do not waste that. That is the Joe Strummer approach, is that every second is important. Every moment is important. Every song is important. Don't squander it. Use it. And grab the listener by the scruff of the neck and come out with something that's important and meaningful and something that absolutely has to be said. Because if the sense that I get from listening to a record is one of maybe either boredom or contractual obligation or kind of go, don't really know what to say, then you kind of go, well, why are you saying anything? get out of the way and let somebody else that's absolutely desperate to say something about the state of the world say something. So, and of course, your first 10 years are the first 10 years where you're probably young, you're very perceptive, you're very passionate. Poverty is also, by the way, a necessary mother of invention. If you are, as a band, not necessarily hugely successful, and that will be in your first few years generally, is that you have this sense of you very sharply feel the teeth of economic inequality or a lack of success or whatever it is, and then over time you become, as William Burroughs said, every agent defects and every artist sells out. Now, it's a difficult tightrope to walking that line between doing something that's meaningful to you and then also doing something that's compelling and important and powerful. And think about some of the songs that are on This Is My Truth, Tell Me Yours, or maybe Pulp's This Is Hardcore, both of which came out in 1998, post-Fame albums, where effectively the concept was around boredom and disillusionment and going, what exactly do you do for an encore? What do you do when you climb the highest mountain? What happens when you have a number one? Because as all political careers inevitably end in failure, what's your next step? Is it to accept that failure is built into the process and to go, actually, I can't be king forever. I can only be number one for a set period of time. I can only be popular for a set period of time. Or are you going to fight against that? And inevitably, you're going to lose. So the concept certainly in modern society is that forever is the only valid definition of a time period. To go, well, actually, everything has a finite lifespan. The Manics lifespan as a charting, successful singles act, that having lasted 20 years from Motown Junk all the way through to This Is the Day, that is quite an achievement, actually. Most bands never get 20 years. Some bands don't even get 2 years of that. And they still carry on. Sometimes you can kind of go, well, actually, success and number one albums and things like that were actually an outlier in the band's career. The band's career was actually more designed to be at a certain level of success, at a certain level of notoriety or public recognition, and to never really get bigger than the Wolverhampton Civic Hall in terms of their touring activity. So for the Manics, National Treasures, which was kind of very similar actually to the Cure's Bloodflowers, was a way of effectively almost staring that inevitable defeat in the face and going, I'm going to lean into this. I'm going to pretend this is what I've always wanted. It's a dangerously close to Spinal Tap's appeal, becoming more selective. But it is an economic reality for some bands. And even bands like the Rolling Stones or the Beatles or whoever, they come a time when they're not kings of the hill anymore. They're not top of the heap. And you have to know when, come in number 51, your time is up. So there are 6 new songs that came out, or 6 new versions of songs that came out during the National Treasures period. So I'm going to pick on those first. I'm going to quickly run through the album, and then we're going to go on to rewind the film, or we might not, depending on how long I take talking about these. So This Is the Day, the single to preview National Treasures. It has on the CD single, it has a B-side, although there are no B-sides on CD singles. They're just extra tracks. This extra track is Rock and Roll Genius, which is effectively a Wire solo track, a Nicky Wire solo track, because the Manics B-sides were just really solo tracks and leftovers that hadn't yet had full band accompaniment to them. And that's where Rock and Roll Genius is not amazing, it's fair to say. On the download versions of it, depending on where you bought them from, non-existent digital storefronts like 7 Digital or whoever, we had extra tracks. So we had We Were Never Told, which is an acoustic track by James. We have a blue mix of Love Sweet Exile, which is just a remix of Love Sweet Exile. And there's an acoustic version of This Is the Day, which is unamazing. And on the vinyl edition of National Treasures, track 14, a previously unreleased song, The Endless Plane of Fortune. And The Endless Plane of Fortune, by the way, on the vinyl edition, this vinyl edition was sold by Q magazine in December 2011 for the grand total of £12.99 in a gatefold sleeve, selected singles arranged chronologically and it features obviously all of the singles pretty much in the order of release: Motown Junk, You Love Us, Kevin Carter, From Despair to Air, La Tristeza Durera, Revol, Ocean Spray, Australia, If You Tolerate This, You Stole the Sun, Let Robinson Sing, Your Love Alone, It's Not War, and then the last track, The Endless Plane of Fortune, which was written by John Cale. And John Cale, formerly of the Velvet Underground. And so this is quite surprising, actually. It's a greatest hits album. What doesn't it have on there? The vinyl edition doesn't have a Design for Life on, the band's biggest hit. It doesn't have Everything Must Go or Kevin Carter. It has Australia, which is awful, and I don't like it. But it does also have, obviously, the previously unreleased song, The Endless Plane of Fortune by John Cale. And it's the only place to get it, so it's one of the few Manics tracks that's only available on vinyl and hasn't officially been released anywhere else. I don't know if The Endless Plane of Fortune is a radio session from 2004, because that's when it was first heard, or whether it is a new studio recording or a previously unreleased studio recording of the song, or whether it's just a licensed version of the BBC track. It doesn't say that it's a licensed version of the BBC song. It says that it's produced by Los Williams and Manic Street Preachers and recorded at Faster Studios in Cardiff. So in all probability, it is a different studio recording to the one that was on the radio session. But The Endless Plane of Fortune is, I think it's a great song. Why it isn't on this as a bit of box set bait, I have no idea. Maybe there isn't enough space. I haven't bothered to look. I can't be bothered to look either. But there we are. So we did get instead National Treasures, released as 2 CDs and a 2 CD and a DVD set. And this is just all the singles presented in chronological order, from Motown Junk through to Let Robinson Sing. Again, kind of building on the imagery that you will have seen from Send Away the Tigers, photographs of women in unusual places, this time kind of drawing a very clear line between the Welsh coal yards, and that's probably what, by the look of it, a disused Welsh colliery there, and the idea of the brass band, the idea of these being folk songs from Wales sent to the rest of the world. From a strange perspective, the band started as a 3-piece. That's the photograph on the front of the Suicide Alley single, which isn't represented. Then we have a number of photographs of the band's 4-piece version with Richie, which ran through to 1995, February 1995, so really only existed in the public eye for 5 years. And then 16 years later, this came out, and probably less than half of the photos represent the lineup of the band that has existed since 1996. Of course, as I said earlier, a band's first 10 years is pretty important, often regarded as the most important 10 years of a band's creative existence, which for the Manics will run from 1992 through to 2001's Know Your Enemy. Everything after that is kind of regarded as new stuff, even though that is actually the last 20-something years of the band's career. As you can see from the unequal weighting of the photos of the band, is that you'll get more photos, if not, or maybe the same exact amount of photos of the Manics as a 4-piece with Richie than you will of the 3-piece version that's existed since 1995. There are a couple of interesting things to point out here, one of which is obviously the artwork. The second one is this is a release of all the promo videos on Blu-ray, DVD actually, and it's missing some promo videos on there, but it also features bonus content of the alternate version of You Love Us, the version of Autumn Song, Jackie Collins' Existential Question title as well, the single that never was from the album that didn't have any hits, Journal for Plague Lovers. Is it any good? If you want a sequential run through all the Manic singles of the band's main years, this is absolutely perfect, completely does the job. But it does feel very much like someone's very distinctly closing the book on the Manics as a commercial entity and kind of preempting the fact that the band won't have hits anymore by saying, well, actually, that album was our one last shot of communication. We don't want to have hits anymore. We're quite happy about that. And I kind of think, well, Are you, or do you just realise that your time is up and you're trying to exit with dignity whilst you have the opportunity to do so? The band followed up National Treasures with one live show in the UK where they performed all the singles out of order. So the longest Manic show I've ever seen, and probably the longest Manic show there will ever be, which features rare and last performances of a number of songs, including, for example, Love Sweet Exile, Let Robeson Sing, Empty Souls, for example. But it didn't feature Suicide Alley, which was a great shame, actually, because I've never seen the Manics perform Suicide Alley. I'd love to see them perform it. As far as I know, they performed it in Japan in 1992. They performed it in Japan in 2012 and Blackwood in 2011, and that's it. That one-off show at the London O2 Arena, which really should have been released as a DVD and somehow bafflingly wasn't. I'd love to own that show on DVD. It was brilliant. Oh, by the way, can you hear that? That's a cat. I'm going to open the door and see if I let the cat in. Right, I've opened the door now, so the cat can come in if that's what he wants to do. Very important part of the day. I'd love to see the O2 show released on DVD, but it won't happen. I don't even know, in fact, if it was filmed, although it was filmed for the screens. I don't know. It wasn't officially, filmed with the idea of an eventual release. But the show was released. In about half of it was released as bonus tracks on various formats of singles, download-only stores, B-sides to download singles, deluxe editions of albums, and about half the show has come out in that fashion. So although it's difficult, stroke impossible, to find some of those tracks now because the digital storefronts don't exist, this is where the death of a digital ghost really, really matters, because you end up having, well, if you bought a song from an exclusive store, for example, let's say the Virgin download store, you were able to own a exclusive live track if you used that one. But then if Virgin withdrew their store, what happened if you lost the copy of the song on a hard drive and then you were never able to listen to that version again? And that's where digital archivists really do get worried about the fact that there is a huge amount of scrubbing of our online histories, because web links just fall out of date, things get deleted, and that's a terrible place to be, because you end up with missing pieces of sleep and missing pieces of history where you kind of go, well, it doesn't make any sense. Like, for example, a little while ago, I tried to look up David Bowie's death announcement on his official website. Couldn't find it. As far as the website consists, davidbowie.com, I think David Bowie's still alive, according to that site. The announcement of his death doesn't appear to be on there. If it is, it's very well hidden indeed. And 2012 saw the band effectively move into a nostalgia act for a period of time. I think they played some shows in Japan. They kind of disappeared a little bit. They didn't really do anything for a while, and there wasn't really any real hint that the band were actually doing anything as such. What were they up to? Well, aside from the broadcast of an instrumental track called See It Like Sutherland for Radio Wales Music Day in early 2013, there was no real idea of what the band were doing. And See It Like Sutherland is a pretty good instrumental. I think it exists in a download form, and takes its cue from a Welsh painter called Sutherland, who saw the world a certain way and presented that through his art and through his work. But the silence was broken with the announcement of a new single and a new album, the Manic's 10th studio album, released on the 16th of September 2013, Rewind the Film, preceded by a single, Show Me the Wonder. And Show Me the Wonder, physically, because I'm still the guy that buys physical singles, only had 2 physical 7-inch single releases, so it didn't have a release as a CD. So if you want to own all of the Manic songs that the Manics have released, you'll need to have a combination of downloads, CDs and vinyl, just to make things nice and easy for you. And format completism is a thing that really matters to me, because I want to own physical copies of everything that the bands that I love release. But of course, having a 7-inch single which has an exclusive B-side on, a second 7-inch single that has an exclusive B-side on, plus digital downloads of exclusive B-sides, makes it impossible to actually own everything on one format. And it annoys me, but of course, as a record collector, part of my life is to be annoyed by everything at some point. It really, really is. Show Me the Wonder got to the grand total of number 77 in the British charts, because who was buying Manic singles anymore, apart from me? Not many people. Probably sold 640 copies. As an opening song, I think it's probably disproportionate as a representation of what the album is and what the album means. It's got this sense of unity, it's got this sense of community, it's got this sense of joy and openness to the world in which it lived in, to kind of go, I want to be blown away by these amazing things that I'm seeing. I want to experience joy and happiness, and show me the wonder of everything in the and joy of everything in the universe, which is a brilliant sentiment, which the song generally presents, but it doesn't reflect what I necessarily want from Manic Street Preachers. And there's two quotes on the 7-inch singles which sum up, I think, the ethos of the band at this point. From Wassily Kandinsky, I don't know who that is. On this one it says, a work of art consists of two elements, the inner and the outer. And Rewind the Film was most definitely an inner-facing album. In 2014, the Manics released their 11th studio album, Futurology, which is most definitely external-facing and angry. And Rewind the Film is a record that, to me at least, is very inward-focused. It's very inward-looking. It's very melancholic. It's very reflective. What it is, it's not the album that I needed to hear in 2013. I'll kind of explain why. I was really, really disappointed when Rewind the Film came out, because it was the first album that had been released by the Manics whilst Britain had been under a conservative rule since Everything Must Go in 1996. The government had changed in 2011, and somehow the British were hoodwinked into voting like turkeys for their own Christmas. And this was under David Cameron's undoubtedly corrupt and incompetent administration, an administration that was in a coalition with Nick Clegg, and an administration who, when they were asked, would you build social housing, the response that came back from Gideon Osborne, not George Osborne, Gideon Osborne, was no, because they'll never vote for us anyway. The actions of that government were only for the people that were voting for them and not representing the full wishes of the people. Now, I think governments come in two forms: the ones that protect the powerful from the powerless, and the ones that protect the powerless from the powerful. The Conservative government was most definitely one that protected the powerful from the powerless, and was run with the interests of their own voters in mind, and not the overall best wishes or economic outstanding output or outturn of the nation as a whole. It was a selfish government that operated for its own benefit and for nobody else's, and I fucking hated it. And when this album came out, I thought I can rely on the Manics, from their past activity and consistency, to be angry about the state of the nation. And instead, Rewind the Film was an enormous disappointment to me, because it sounded like defeat or surrender. It's very similar, actually, in many ways, to This Is My Truth, Tell Me Yours. It's the sound of depression. It's the sound of inward-facing reflection. Now, I think that apathy and anger are two sides of the same coin. Apathy is a kind of inward-facing depression about the failure of oneself to make a change upon the world, and so therefore, depression is more a kind of self anger directed internally, whereas anger, proper anger, is angry at other people for their failures or their shortcomings, or for them having not done certain things. So that's where anger comes in, because anger it comes from disappointment in others that you can't control or influence. Depression is more inward facing, around being, and depressed at and unhappy about the outcomes and circumstances that perhaps, if only I'd done something different, if only I'd done this or that or the other. Whereas anger is more a case of, Why didn't you do this? And Rewind the Film was directing that anger internally into a sense of defeat, a sense of we did not win, and so therefore we are disappointed in ourselves. And you can kind of see, even from the cover here, Rewind the Film, there's the idea of a number of sets of ideas that are tied in with melancholy. So I think this photograph is taken from a moving vehicle on the Severn Bridge. The Severn Bridge, which links Britain, or more correctly England, to Wales. It's a toll bridge, I think, and I also think it's the bridge that Ritchie allegedly, or according to some theories, threw himself off in the last moments of his public life. But that has not been confirmed and no body has been found. But this is a kind of symbolising the relationship between England and Wales. And I went out with the Welsh girl for 7 years, between 1991 and 1998. So I feel perhaps more closely aligned to Wales than lots of people do, because I practically lived there for 7 years. In the 90s, and I have an understanding of how it feels to be in a place that feels almost as if it's taken for granted by Westminster. Growing up in Birmingham, for example, and spending lots of time in Wales, I very definitely have got a sense of Westminster only really being interested in itself and in London. So, for example, Wales was pretty much a forgotten country, in the same way that Birmingham often felt forgotten by the government, as if it was a source of revenue, but it was somewhere that they didn't really have to think too much about. They're never going to vote for us anyway, so let's not even bother trying to make it better. And for me, Rewind the Film is an album that, from a conceptual point of view, seems to be thinking about and focusing on the sense of the lost sense of community that came from the closure of the pits and the collieries in the 80s, where effectively, if you were the only employer in that particular village, if the employer left the village or left the town, then it became a ghost town. This happened in places like, for example, Longbridge in Birmingham when the car factory closed. This happened in Swansea, in Newport, for example, where the main employer, I think, in Newport, at least from what I heard, was the pot noodle factory, and it gave everyone 11-month contracts, and then it would rehire them. So what you'd have is you'd have a month of forced unemployment. You didn't have any permanent employment. You lived in a precarious situation. There was no financial security. You were exploited by the employers, and also because you were only ever employed for 11 months at a time, there was always a sense that that you as a worker had no rights, had no dignity, had no value, and very clearly kind of highlighted what happens when you have an unequal relationship between the employer and the employed. Now, this sounds horrendously like the Simpsons' fake Russian kids' TV program, Worker Meet Parasite, but it's not really like that. It's just that's an economic reality, for example, places like the Amazon factories, which are not unionized. Big corporations hate workers. They hate unions. They hate the idea of having to pay somebody money, but they want us to spend our money with them without realizing that if we don't have money to spend with them because they're not paying us any money, we won't spend any money with them because we have to spend money on things like food and rent and our house, which have been weaponized by the rich in a wealth consolidation that has taken place. Now, this has gone very, very political, but the Manics are a political band, and this highlights, I think, my sense of disappointment that exists within Rewind the Film, because Rewind the Film as an album seems very heavily rooted in the sense of, well, what's happened if you as a nation or as a community have been fractured and broken by an employer that has deliberately tried to destroy the community upon which you live. So, for example, especially in some of the smaller villages and towns, the main centre of the social lives was the working men's clubs, the community bars, the associations of people of similar mindsets, the bowling clubs, all these type of things. But everything requires money to work in capitalism, and if you scoop that money out, if you destroy the jobs that exist at the centre of that community that underpin and uphold absolutely everything else, then you find yourself actually living in a kind of zombie ghost town where everyone is struggling for money and the sense of community is atomized into a sense of like worker ants fighting amongst themselves for limited resources. And that's kind of, I think, the thing that underpins Rewind the film, which is signalled, I think, a little bit by the photograph there of the Severn Bridge, kind of indicating the relationship between England and Wales and central Westminster and Wales that really kind of sits at the heart of those destroyed and atomised relationships that have fractured communities, even down to the point of the miners' strike in 1985, which is mentioned in the Manic song 1985, where if people went to work during the strikes, they were scabs and it would divide families and all that type of stuff because people were strike breaking. It's a very complex set of relationships and ideas, but it's ones which were certainly quite clear to me from spending a lot of time in Wales in the 90s that were real and valid and tangible kind of parts of people's existence. Now, with 35 minutes, I haven't even got onto the first track here, so I guess I better just get stuck in and go for it. The first track is This Sullen Welsh Heart, which is absolutely not what I wanted. What I wanted to hear with Rewind the film was a fierce, angry refutation of mismanagement by the rich towards everybody else in the country, and how we'd been exploited. But really what we were looking at instead was a lament for a lost sense of community. And This Sullen Welsh Heart really picks that up right from the opening lyric. The idea of going, I don't want my children to grow up like me. It's too soul destroying. It's a wasting disease. And I can't fight this war anymore. It's time to surrender. It's time to move on. And there's that sense of the war has been lost. There is only so much energy that any one person has. And if you exist in a war of attrition, for example, if you're in a war between, let's say, rich and poor, between employers and employed, between those type of things, is in a war of attrition, the stronger party will win. In the same way that if it's one person that feels that they've been served an injustice by an organisation or a company, you aren't going to get a satisfaction to that, because you've got a company which has got thousands of people and millions of pounds behind it, and you're just one person. You know, it's an unequal war which can't be won necessarily, which is why there is power in the union, comrades. But the lyric to This Sullen Welsh Heart is kind of going, well, actually, the idea of sullen is actually really quite quaint and British. It's the idea of a kind of somewhat misplaced, somewhat youthful rebellion and a distrust for authority, which ties itself into the lyric around the act of creation saves us from despair. It's a phrase that keeps repeating in my head. It's not enough to succeed, others must fail. My unhappy mantra, I wish I could escape. So I think it's not enough to succeed, others must fail, is a statement by, I can't even remember which economist it was in the 1930s in the length of the Great Depression. Great Depression, by the way, being a Manics track from 2007, Send Away the Tigers. And it's the idea of actually flipping between these two viewpoints is the idea of a class war that's waged upon the proletariat by the employers. This is far more political than I was expecting this episode to be, but we're in it and we're going for it. So let's have it like that. There's the idea of a question in this album. It's soft, it's intimate, it's almost whispering in your ear. The idea of its conversation around stripping away the bombast and going, well, you know, who are we? What is the national identity? What is the national character? What is the future of this nation? And what is a nation anyway? Which is a strong, I think the underpinning theory that sits alongside the whole of Rewind the film, the idea of something having been lost and a quest to return to it. Track 2 is Show Me the Wonder, which I've mentioned before. Again, Show Me the Wonder makes a reference to exiles, it makes a reference to silence, it makes a reference to the birthplace of the universe and miracles and all those type of things. The idea of going, you know, we measure the nostalgia. Is heaven a place where nothing ever happens? Is it too much to ask to believe in everything? The idea of heaven. Now, I sometimes have struggled with the idea of heaven being a place where nothing ever happens, although I think that is a Talking Heads lyric, and it is a work of art as well, because I've seen the massive kind of lit up neon sign on the roof of the quarter house in Folkestone, not too far away from here. But the idea being that if heaven is a place where nothing ever happens, if you spend your whole life kind of like a sculptor, chipping away at the bits of your life that don't look like your life until they do resemble what your life is, then heaven is a place where nothing happens because you finally achieve that sense of peace and grace. You've arrived at where you need to be. And then you're kind of going, well, show me the wonder, the birthplace of the universe, the place where I want to be. The wonder is that sense of peace, where there is no war, where there is no conflict, where there is no unfinished business that needs to be addressed. And I mean, it's a great lyric actually, and I'm warming to the album the more I talk about it. Track 3 is Rewind the Film, featuring Richard Hawley, replacement guitarist for the Pulps, Jarvis Cocker's Pulp, and a fine artist in his own right, who minds the furrow of a kind of modern day version of the ancient crooners, so tying into that tradition. And there's a sense of, certainly in Rewind the Film again, about the song, about a sense of contentment, about being surrounded with your things, your stuff, your books, your films, your records. And there's a lyric about, I want to feel small, lying in my mother's arms, playing my old records, hoping that they'll never stop. Back to the pages of my books, rewind the film. Once more, I want the world to see it all. Let me hide under the sheets and celebrate the boredom. Let me hide under the sheets with the radio on. This is very definitely an album that is about the sense of having lost a home which once existed. Now, there's an idea that once you grow out of your parents, or you move out of your parents' home and your parents start to die, is that you can never go home again. And if your parents have died, or if you're estranged from your parents, or your parents have turned out that, in your opinion, perhaps your parents don't want to know you because they're embarrassed by who you are and who you were and what you once represented, because their lives have moved in very different directions once you become an adult. There's a sense of kind of going, well, actually, home isn't a physical place. Home is a feeling, and if that feeling can no longer exist, there's a sense of feeling homeless in the world and having to create your own home, having to create your own environment that feels like home. Build your own mythology, and that sense of being exiled from somewhere is something that's tangible and real. And then if you think of home as being perhaps the community that you grew up in, a village which centered around a central employer, a coal mine, for example, and having that taken away, it's kind of like a person that's had their heart removed, is that you've got all the other elements of it, but they don't actually have the central thing around which everything used to rotate. Track 4 is Builder of Routines. Builder of Routines is a song that ties into a couple of themes that we've got elsewhere. The first one is about routine, so the idea of being, be boring and unoriginal in your life, so you can be violent and original in your work, is a quote that's on a Manics mug that I had that I bought in 1996. But the idea of, certainly Builder of Routines, is around, if you set yourself things that work, you can then concentrate on higher tasks. So my brain, I think of as having a higher and a lower brain. So for example, when I'm walking, I'm using my lower brain, left, right, left, right. It's not very intellectually exciting to walk. Or doing the washing up, not very intellectually exciting to do the washing up, or to do the housework, or to hang up the clothes. Cleaning, cooking, flower arranging dissolves in a sense of liberation, much like the lyrics to Virginia State Epileptic Connolly on the Journal for Plague Lovers. Also, Nicky's statement about I love hoovering, which was on a shirt which he wore in 1997. The idea of being a builder of routines is that you establish a set of things that you understand that you can live with, that provide known, solid, safe environments for you to operate within. And that is, where builder of routines really exists. I'm a builder of routines. It makes me safe and clean. But then there's that last bit that closes at the end of the song, which says, now I hate middle age, in between acceptance and rage, democracy made a fuel out of me, but I'm a builder of routines. That sense of putting established foundations around your life, so you then have things that you can work with. And some people go, as you get older, you become old, you become boring, you get into golf or whatever. And it's like, well, actually, you just kind of, through trial and error, You work through things that are difficult. You take away the things that are difficult, and you focus upon the things that aren't difficult. And you, as William Burroughs said, do easy, DE. You find things that are easier. You focus and you hone down upon those. Track 5 is Four Lonely Roads. Why that isn't track 4, I don't know. But it features Kate LeBon, who I saw supporting John Grant in 2018 in Birmingham. And it is a song that kind of focuses upon simplifying everything. So as a quote from on one of the Manic singles, simplify, simplify, simplify. You take away all the extraneous parts and you focus on simplicity, on directness, upon freedom from expectations, about how you can build a design for life for the future, with that fear of growing older in the future. That look to the future and it makes me cry, and working upon that type of thing. And then we have I Miss the Tokyo Skyline, which is track 6. The Manics worked somewhat ad hoc fashion on a thing called the Cities Project, which is an idea of doing songs that were focused around cities at various places in the world. And the Cities Project didn't come to realization, but the songs, or some of the songs, exist, and I Miss the Tokyo Skyline is one of those songs. It's a song around playing in Japan in 2012, around the idea of thinking, well, we're like these 3 scrappy boys from Blackwood in Wales, and somehow we've managed to get to Tokyo and play to a few hundred people in our band, which is an amazing place to be in. And at the same point, it's kind of going, I just want to go home. And I feel a little bit weird about being away from home. It's an unusual approach lyrically, but it's really interesting because a lot of the songs feel like homesickness, or very clearly around the absence of a home to go to. You flip over the album, side 2. Not much point me showing side 2 as the lyrics here. Your Anthem for a Lost Cause, which was the second single to be released from the album, charted at 200 in the charts. 200. I'm guessing that's 3 sales, 4 sales maybe. I don't know. It's not many, is it? The Anthem for a Lost Cause it feels like a modern day kind of revisiting, revamping of Design for Life, but not so good, which sounds very bitchy until you realise that's exactly what it is. If you listen to it, there's a sense of loss, there's a sense of a heart being ripped out of society. It's got strings which are very similar to Postcards from a Young Man. It's designed for a stadium sing-along, but it never got to that stage. It kind of feels like if you listen to a band and they do a very cynical song that sounds like their biggest hit, but it's their latest single, and you kind of go, but it's not as good, is it? All you're really doing is you're highlighting to us the differences between then and now, and how much you've changed and how much we've changed. So there's not even a sense of nostalgia. It's nostalgia for a time that never existed, as Jella Biafra sang. It's a song that I think was designed to remind us of something that we have lost. And whilst James wrote the lyric to Anthem for a Lost Cause, it kind of shows the power that songs have to inspire people, but also to say an anthem for a lost cause, now ashes, bone and splinter, and once a glittering prize, the composition writes. Now, Glittering Prize being a Simple Minds song, and the Manics are drawing some parallels between themselves and Simple Minds during the course of their career, especially the Futurology album, which comes next. Also, the Manics have worked with a singer-songwriter called the Anchoress, who is a fabulously talented Welsh woman who's made a couple of great albums, being The Art of Losing and Confessions of a Romance Novelist. I think she's splendid, absolute brilliance. But the Anchoress also, in her day job, has performed with and been keyboardist and vocalist for Simple Minds in their touring capacity. And you know, you got to put money on the table. And there's very clearly, it's not a coincidence that the phrase glittering prize is used in this particular song. But it charted at number 200, which kind of tells you that one last attempt at mass communication failed to take root. Track 8 is As Holy as the Soil That Buries Your Skin. We are very definitely in the time where we're at about something like the 96th track that's been released on a Manics album. And by the time you get to your 96th song that's on an album, especially in 20 years, you end up kind of thinking, what's the point? Is anyone even going to listen to the 8th track on the 10th album? You know, like, I'm going to pick a song at random now, by AC/DC, Cover You in Oil. Does anyone really remember Cover You in Oil apart from Angus and Malcolm and Brian Johnson? I'm not sure anybody remembers Cover You in Oil. Or what's the song? The song was something like the Furor or something. The Furor. It's kind of like, really? Is there like a why? You know, why? What is the point? Why do I have to listen to this song? Now, it's not a bad song. It's just not a great song. Um, it's got a. It feels like it's a sort of nursery rhyme lyric. It's a very straightforward, very standard A B rhyming structure. It's obvious, it's straightforward. It feels a little bit like an ode to Richie, actually. With that line, "I love you, so won't you please come home? It's been so long, but I can't let go." But it's not vastly memorable, which I guess happens. You know, it really does. Track 9 is Three Ways to See Despair. Quite why that isn't track 3, I don't know, but there you are. It's got the only guitar solo on the whole of the album. The rest of the album has no guitar solos on, which is pretty weird, actually. The song, I think, feels to be about the release of melancholy despair, about the idea of letting go of your miseries and your despairs, and kind of just setting them free and not holding them close to your chest forever. Three Ways to See Despair was written with the idea that perhaps the band might gift it to Morrissey, but they never sent it to him, they kept it for themselves, which is interesting. I'm not sure, listening to it, that I could see that happening, even if Morrissey wrote, or even if Morrissey sang songs that other people had given to him, which he almost definitely wouldn't do, but I don't think it would work. And then we've got 3 more songs. We've got Running Out of Fantasy, 30-Year War, and the last track the penultimate track is Manorbia. So Running Out of Fantasy is a companion piece to My Sullen Welsh Heart. It very much picks up, I think, some of the themes which we have in the Holy Bible. As I said, the Holy Bible is a very angry album. It's externally facing. It's around the disappointments and indignities that the world has put upon you. You know, I tried to walk in a straight line, the last shred of dignity. Whereas Rewind the film is internally facing. It's very melancholy in its approach. The lyrics are very much kind of self-facing. So it's all about internally analysing. And probably the therapist bill for this band is absolutely huge at this point, about internalising and understanding those issues. And then we have Manorbia, which is the first instrumental song by the Manics to have made it onto an album, which is fine, but it's hinting at what is coming next. And then the last track on the album is the 30-Year War, which is the nearest, which kind of is a precursor to everything that we're going to have on Futurology. It's fun, it's angry, it's direct. It's really kind of pointing out, and I mean, it makes very, very clear the themes that we've got in the rest of the album, as indicated on the sleeve, which is the longest running joke in history is to kill the working classes in the name of liberty, the lies of Hillsborough, the blood of Orgreave, and the invasion at the BBC. 30 years of war to darken all our class, black propaganda lies and mistrust. The old boy network won the war again. And it's too little, too late to salvage the rest of the album. But what it does do is it points out and goes, this is where we're going next. We are furious. And we've looked inside, we've done a bit of self-diagnosis, physician, heal thyself. We've reached the conclusions. It's not us, it's you. It's the ruling classes, the conservative government, the propaganda that's propagated by people like the Daily Telegraph and the Daily Mail, that tells you that there's always going to be an immigrant that's going to come in about to steal and inject AIDS into your baby and all that other stuff and eat your hamsters. It's nonsense, and the song is very clearly kind of pointing the finger at the guilty parties, whoever they may be. Now, Rewind the Film is not just 12 songs. There is a deluxe edition here that features the demos of the album, and also some songs live at the O2. So as I mentioned earlier, the O2 Arena show on the 17th of December 2011. And this deluxe edition of the album features the demos of the album, which means that the Richard Hawley vocal and the Caitlin Rose vocal and the Cat Bond vocal are not on there. It's sung by James, and we've got a slightly scrappier, more organic, more lively version of the records on the deluxe edition. But we also have There by the Grace of God, Stay Beautiful, Your Love Alone Is Not Enough, The Love of Richard Nixon, and Revol backing up the CD as extra live songs. They don't feel like they belong there. They just feel like extra tracks that are shoved out to try and force you into buying it. Going, if you buy the deluxe edition, not only do you get the demo, you get some live songs. Ooh, buy me. Doesn't always work, but I buy everything. I guess I am a fool, and I have been taken. And that is the deluxe edition of the album. In Japan, because Japan always has bonus tracks, there was one extra song, Death of a Digital Ghost, as mentioned earlier on, which is the first Nicky and James duet. And there's also a number of other kind of B-sides. There's a song called Melancholy Me, which was only on a download. The Show Me the Wonder single had T.E. Lawrence on a Bike, which is a James solo demo, and What Happened to the Blue Generation. And What Happened to the Blue Generation is, I think, a really important song, actually, because the band described themselves in their early press releases around about the time of Suicide Alley as the Blue Generation, a generation that was doomed to failure, that and the song very clearly kind of addresses what happens when you feel like you're doomed to failure, when you have a death of your ideals, when you're forced to accept that you may betray your original ideas. And the Blue Generation, I think, takes its name from two key films that came out in 1986. One, Betty Blue, about a woman with crippling depression, and the other one, Blue Velvet, about the lies that sit underneath the surface of a modern society and a modern town. But both of the songs, or more correctly, both of those films kind of address something else, which is the inner narrative of a human being. And the Blue Generation, which is how the band described themselves, was drawn by the possibilities of the sky and of the sea, the idea of freedom, the idea of being able to self-actualize what you want to be, who you want to achieve, in a world that tries desperately to pour you into a suit and crush you down. And if you stand up like a nail, you will be knocked down. It's a powerful image. It's not a great B-side. That brings us to the end of the Manics Rewind the Film album. And whilst it sounds like I've been pretty harsh on it, I haven't really. I just wanted something at this point in time that was more aggressive, more outward-facing, and targeted perhaps who I saw to be the architects of the failure of modern society in the year 2013, which wasn't the self. It was the others. It was the people with power that were operating to protect the powerful from the powerless, and to keep us crushed under the jackboot of capitalism and oppression. Now, that sounds very Communist Party. I'm not, I think, aligned to any political party at the moment, apart from possibly the Satanic Temple. But you know, this album was not what I needed from the Manics at the time. I wanted something that very clearly addressed the cause of the malaises in modern society at the feet of the people who had the power, that were responsible for the oppression of the rest of us. And this is not it. This is an inward-facing album. It's a call for community, a call for unity, and as is very clearly seen in the videos to Show Me the Wonder and Anthem for a Lost Cause, around the loss of a society that was fractured by the nature of the economic realities we have to live in. It's a really good album, but it's an album for sitting at home with the windows and the doors shut on a rainy Tuesday. It is not an album for a summer's day. And it's an album that took me a long time to really appreciate how good it could be. So there we have it. That is Rewind the Film. The next Manics episode, I'll be talking about a significantly more interesting album, Futurology, and a significantly less interesting period that immediately followed that, or more correctly, immediately came after that, as well, as the band became a nostalgia machine. But that is a different episode, and as Taz Katana says in Star Wars, that is a tale for another time. So thanks for spending 59 minutes and 56 seconds with me whilst I talk about a Manics album. If you made it to the end, that's great. Reward yourself with a chocolate muffin and an ice cream. And I will see you all again soon. Okay, don't forget to like, subscribe, say nice things in the comments, or don't say anything at all. And I will see you all some other time, hopefully not too long from now. Okay, ciao.